Hey friends. I figured it's been a pretty long time since I made a Octatrack overview video, so I thought it'd be nice to talk a little bit about how I've been using the Octatrack most recently. If you've been following my channel, you'll see that I've been doing a lot of improvisation recently, and that's definitely bled into how I use the Octatrack as well. Most recently, I did a jam at my friend Annabelle's house. I came with no preparation, so I had to dive in pretty quickly. And that gave me the idea to talk about how to do a project with no preparation. Obviously, there are some things that will be prepared in advance, the most important of which is how my files are organized in my memory card. But besides that, I'm starting with a blank project, and I think I'd like to take that as an inspiration point to explore some ideas on how to hit the ground running with the Octatrack without having to have some kind of a template. This approach is mostly born out of necessity. These days I go through phases of using and then not using the Octatrack, so it can be difficult to dive into past projects. This tutorial is meant for people who are at an intermediate level of experience, so I won't be doing a lot of explaining in terms of basic concepts, trigs, record buffers, machines, things like that. I recommend that you familiarize yourself with some of these items if that's not something that you're comfortable with at the moment. My setup is pretty simple right now. I have an OP1 connected to my Octatrack via tracks C and D, input C and D. And the main out is running to a compressor off screen, which then goes into my analog heat. Since I have an OP1 connected, I'm going to start by setting up track 8 as a through machine. Typically I use the Octatrack as a rhythm machine. I like to use loops, sample chains, and a chain of kicks that combines some of my favorite kicks in one place. So I will start by assigning those to tracks 3, 4, and 6. You'll notice that I'm using the assigned file positions that are in the audio pool by default, just to save time a little bit. So here I should talk a little bit about file management. My files are organized by category, so I have a folder of chains, loops, one-shots, some packs that are a combination of files that I've collected and things I've downloaded, and performance files. Track 3, I typically like to put loops, so I'm going to go into this section and use this office hours folder, which if you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that I've streamed a lot under the name of office hours. Track 4 is where I like to put a sample chain. We'll start with the 808 chain, which comes with the samples from Mars pack, and we want to make sure the machine is set to slice so we can access those. Another thing we want to do before we move forward is to set the pattern to per track so that we can have different trig lengths for each track while maintaining a master length. Typically I like to set this to 32 or 64. Track 6 is where I put my kicks. So I'm going to go to my chains and I'm going to choose Moonrise kicks. These kicks I arranged for a set I did for this small festival called Moonrise. And you also want to make sure that under source, you're adjusting your time stretch to be off for these single sample triggers. This keeps them smooth and untime stretched. As for tracks 1 and 2, typically I keep these as flex machines so that I can sample other things in my project, whether that's the OP1 or something internal. So I'm going to change track 1 to a flex machine assigned to record buffer 1. But something I've been doing more recently with track 2 is this chain of tambourine loops I put together sometime last year. I was inspired by a lot of breakbeat music I was hearing, and it always seems like they have tambourine loops running separately to help embellish their beats. So I'm going to assign that. I basically downloaded some of my favorites from Splice, and then I laid them end to end in Ableton, making sure to leave an even amount of space in between each one. And then I made sure that the amount that I had chosen was a multiple of 4 so that I could slice them automatically with the audio editor. Once I have some kind of rhythm established, I can use track 1 to record a bass line from the OP1. When working with external instruments, you want to make sure both devices are set to the same tempo. You also want to make sure your Flex Machine recording is set to quantize on hit. I typically set this to 1 bar. This approach relies heavily on file management, because if I don't like a particular component, I want to be able to hit function right or left to switch out my samples for new ones. This is a key mechanic of this approach, and at the best of times, it can sound like I'm live mixing a DJ set. Personally, I find it way more intuitive to switch samples around this way than in Ableton, but I'm sure you could easily do the same with hot swapping or something like that. So at this point, I pretty much have all the components I need to begin creating. With this approach, I'm much less compelled to build out patterns, and instead tend to expand on a single pattern through performance, using filters, muting, and scenes. Using the Octatrack this way typically makes me feel much more like I'm performing live than when I'm swapping between multiple pre-assigned stems on different patterns. In other words, there's no safety net, and that comes with a host of costs and benefits. If I want the beat to change, I'll typically mute certain tracks, clear their sequences, and swap out the assigned files while other things play on in the background. One trick I've been using with scenes is that I like to map scene B to a pitch shift in the kick or bass line to create an instantly palpable B section. It gives me something quick and impactful to do with a crossfader, and I usually start to build out distinctions between the A and B sections from there. So that's pretty much my opening moves when starting a blank project. With an external synth like the OP1 and enough sample loops banked up, I can jam for a good hour before losing steam. I should also say that the goal of this approach is flexibility. As my music tastes shift, I can either change the sounds I'm using or manipulate them in new ways, while benefiting from the same or similar starting point. You could say I'm approaching the Octatrack a little more like an instrument in that regard, and that definitely forgoes some of the more advanced capabilities of this device. But personally, I think it's important to keep our goals somewhere outside these magical boxes, just in case there's an easier solution somewhere in between them. I'd like to explore this approach more formally in future videos. I'm interested in the idea of building out a project live as part of a DJ set, so that the complexity of the music evolves with the setup in real time. So stay tuned for more experiments in this direction. Thanks for watching.